Coming up on this episode of the Roundtable.
If you're casting about for some kind of crazy justification, it's right there because, as Ryan is sort of indicating, like they come out with their faces hanging out and they say it. They say that white people are inherently oppressive, have guilt in their blood and their veins. And so, of course, you're going to get people who, when they are casting about, does that count as political radicalization? Like, I don't know exactly how to define it, but I do know that it's like the fodder for it is ever more on the table. And that's not the fault of Tucker Carlson, right? Like getting rid of Tucker Carlson is not going to solve that problem if you continue to harangue people about the color of their skin every damn day. Refuse to let any person, black, white, or brown, forget what color they are and where that puts them in this hierarchy. Like, you can shut down every Fox News organization you want to, and nothing is going to change about this situation until our elites take a good hard look in the mirror and come to understand their complicity in this foment that we've got going on in this country, this intense racialization. Hello, and welcome to the Roundtable, your official weekly podcast of Spectre. I mean, the American Mind, which is totally not a shadowy secret organization dedicated to the overthrow of James Bond or something. This is a reference to our latest hit piece. If you haven't already found it, we'll probably talk about it today. But first, let me introduce the gang. I'm your host, Spencer Clavin, features editor of The American Mind. I'm joined by our managing editor, Seth Barron, and by president and publisher, Ryan Williams. We have a veritable feast of items to talk about today. All sorts of things going on, some good, some bad, some in between. So let's, I think, start with the bad. We have had another one of these just horrendous shootings, always kind of somber to talk about and difficult to talk about because of how immediately they've become politicized, especially if they fit the right narrative. And that's the case here. So this is a shooting in Buffalo. I imagine folks will know about this. 10 people were killed at a Buffalo supermarket. The suspect is 18-year-old Peyton Gendron, and he's been linked to this 180-page long manifesto, kind of a rambling screed, which has been the object of much breathless media coverage because, among other things, first of all, it sort of has all this racist stuff in it, but also it refers to the Great Replacement theory, at least to the sort of dim and strange understanding of the Great Replacement theory of this person. This is a real, I think, gift to the left and to the enemies of just free speech, to the cathedral, whatever you want to call it, because Great Replacement has been an object of some discussion and is and also a kind of hate object of the left. And we've actually done some work, I think, to unpick all of this at The American Mind. We ran a feature on the Great Replacement, and especially, well, not especially, but including the stuff that has been said about this idea by Tucker Carlson. So replacement theory originates with this guy, Renaud Camus, sort of French theorist and critic, sort of famously gay, and sort of talked about it before that was popular, and then also had this very unpopular and controversial theory that the when you import vast numbers of refugees during the refugee crisis into places like France, you are going to cause all sorts of problems. And so Tucker has taken this up, mostly, from my understanding, to comment on the crisis at the southern border, this idea that, more and more people being let in illegally, and then in many cases, enabled to vote, then kind of dilutes the power of the actual citizenry, that is to say, the legal citizens of America. This is Great Replacement via Tucker Carlson. This is sort of some of the discussion of it. Also, like many kind of controversial ideas, has been sort of grabbed onto by crazy people, notably at the at the rally, the Unite the Right rally, which was also another object of much attention and hand waving. Here's what Carlson. I'm going to read what Carlson has to say in the wake of this shooting. He says of the manifesto, it's definitely racist, bitterly so. Gendron reduces people to their skin color. That's the essence of racism, and it is immoral. What he wrote does not add up to a manifesto. It is not a blueprint for a new extremist political movement, much less the potential inspiration for a racist revolution. The document is not recognizably left-wing or right-wing. It's not really political at all. The document is crazy. And this is, I think that's basically the line that we at the Roundtable have been taking about sort of all of these mass shooters, whatever ostensible putative, quote-unquote, side of the spectrum they come from. We talked a while back about this shooting in Brooklyn, a guy named Frank James, and these sort of unhinged rants in the other direction, very sort of 1619 tinged. But we also talked about there the fact that, look, we're in this moment of stoked racial grievances. We have an elite that is dedicated to sowing and exacerbating racial tension in the most histrionic and extreme possible terms. And it's likely then that you are going to get crazy people who come to understand and view the world that way, and to reduce people to their skin color. So, I mean, to us, or at least to me, this is the real story here, is if you put Frank James up against this guy, what you have is a pattern not of like a secret right-wing cabal, but of crazy people who are being driven yet more crazy by an elite whose job it is to drive everybody crazy. And so, this is a hideous and tragic event. Obviously, it's also kind of predictably being folded into this effort to delegitimize discussion of certain real issues, such as the fact that there is a real just flood tide level crisis at the southern border, such as the crime of like noticing that maybe if you have a polity with certain traditions and history, and then you import like vast numbers of Muslim immigrants into Paris or whatever, you are likely to get a lot of tension, dissension, and potential failure of assimilation, especially if your elites are kind of anti-assimilation. So all of this has been cooked up into a nasty little stew. And I wanted to hand it over to you guys. I mean, is there these manifestos are so unhinged and so mentally ill that they're matched almost only by what you read in the legacy media. But is there anything more that we can make of all this?
Well, I took a look at this fellow's manifesto, such as it is. Yeah, it's not much of a manifesto. The whole thing is just like a cut and paste job from mostly like anti-Semitic websites. Here's what I mean. Okay, now maybe this assumes like giving him too much like credit in terms of like having like a rational plan. But here's the interesting thing about the replacement, theory, or I mean, I'm not even sure it's a theory. Isn't it just a fact that this is like what's happening? I mean, the question is, to what extent is it intentional or not? But whatever. Why? Okay, his whole thing, the whole document is just all about the Jews. I mean, he says a few things about how he hates Black people.
Interesting, right?
But why go and target? I mean, of all the people in the United States, Black people actually have the least to do with like replacement theory. For one thing, they would also, I mean, as we know from like as Barbara Jordan pointed out in the 90s, like Black people actually are, some of the primary victims of illegal immigration or just mass immigration, victims economically. But they don't really have any, it's not like they have a huge say in like pushing for expanded immigration. They seem like actually to be kind of like neutral players in the question. So I don't even understand why attack them. Really seems like totally beside the point. Yeah, and the guy's obviously like deranged. I mean, I guess he tortured animals. It's funny, Bill de Blasio, former mayor who's now planning to run for Congress, he had this interesting set of tweets. He's like, okay, he has these two tweets. And in one, he says like, Americans are dying because Facebook and Twitter refuse to stop profiting off hate. They give murderers like the one in Buffalo a platform to weaponize racist ideology. And then a few hours later, he writes, this kid showed up to school in hazmat gear. For a school assignment, he said he wanted to commit murder-suicide after graduation. He underwent psychiatric treatment, and not one person tried to invoke New York's red flag law. Well, so, I mean, was he a politically radicalized terrorist? Or was he just plainly mentally ill? I mean, I guess those two things aren't mutually exclusive. But if you're going to acknowledge that he's like a seriously mentally ill individual, like, you know, kind of psychotic, then it's not clear that he needed to be politically radicalized or that his political radicalization played into anything. Now, okay, I'll grant that maybe those are not totally mutually exclusive, but I mean, from a legal perspective, it seems like they kind of are. I don't really have a lot to say. I mean, what do you say about these guys? He's obviously like bonkers. I mean, last year, some Muslim guy went and killed 10 people in a supermarket where? In Colorado. That's totally disappeared. This, I mean, I heard the governor and the attorney general of New York on television saying that that hate speech is not protected by the First Amendment. Like, how are they jumping from this maniac shooting people to redefining the First Amendment based on that? You know, they're always pushing. They're always pushing.
Yeah, it's perfectly predictable, as Spencer kind of said, that the left has used this horrible event immediately as a cudgel against their political enemies. I mean, it's really, I think, a mistake to consider left and right politically for any of these types. Both of you were kind of getting at that. You know, they all seem to have something in common. You know, Roof, the New Zealand guy, I forget the guy's name who shot up the Walmart in Texas or whatever it was. The incel in Santa Barbara, remember that guy? I mean, they're all disturbed, you know, teenagers or a little older sometimes, but disturbed young men who are some weird amalgam of kind of fever swamp, anarcho, internet, you know, lunatics. They're kind of revved up and fed propaganda from both left and right. I mean, there's sort of an eco-terrorist element to the New Zealand guy, and I mean, they're all a mishmash. So it's just a flat out manipulative lie that the left has done. You know, to say somehow that, you know, Tucker Carlson quoting the left back at them mostly about their gleeful celebration of demographic change since 1965, and now, you know, the way the left has talked about this, it's an example of our friend and colleague Mike Anton's celebration parallax. If the left talks about replacing the historic white majority of America through immigration or whatever else, and celebrates it, you know, that's fine. It's true and good, and we're on the cusp of truly being a diverse country and having Democrat rule solidified because a more diverse population votes more for Democrats. That was their argument. If you're a Democrat, that's fine. If you bring that up as a Republican, you're evil. You're hawking conspiracy theories. I mean, these are just a few headlines from the last 10 years or so. I mean, the cover of The Atlantic, a special State of the Union issue during the Obama administration, the end of white America, ? A New York Times opinion piece after Charlottesville called We Can Replace Them. You know, Biden, we need a constant, unrelenting stream of immigrants. Charles Blow writing an opinion piece in the New York Times in 2018 about white extinction anxiety, you know, all this kind of stuff. Books like The Diversity Explosion, how new racial demographics are remaking America. So, I mean, the demographic transformation is not in dispute, but the left's kind of schizophrenic or hysteria over the right, bringing it up, maybe questioning the endless demographic change of the country and trying to talk about this and debate it and do politics around it is what they object to, because fundamentally, all this for the left is inevitable. The kind of endlessly multicultural America is a great and wonderful thing, and you can't push back on it. You certainly can't challenge the notion of open borders. You certainly can't discuss, good immigrants versus bad immigrants in terms of cultural affinity and assimilation potential or any of that. This is just all of a piece with the very dishonest and, in a way, apolitical. The desire of the left is to make this all apolitical. That is either inevitable or, the right side of history demands it as a matter of justice. That was kind of that's been the myth that's grown up around the '65 Immigration Act. We had racist and evil immigration policies until then, so now we must embrace the change that it issued. So that's how to interpret all of this, and it's just despicable, frankly, the lies that are being spouted on social media by blue checks and by Democratic politicians and across normal news media. And I think for most of them, especially the leaders of the Democratic Party, it's purely cynical, and it's pretty gross.
Yeah, I mean, like Seth is saying, with all of these guys who go off like this in these terrible ways and tragic, ugly ways, it's like these are fevered minds, deeply disturbed, casting about for any peg onto which to hang their kind of just fever dreams. And sometimes they hang it on a leftist peg, sometimes they hang it on a rightist peg, but they're all the same sick, sad guy, and like in my view, the wisest and most humane policy in response to that sort of thing, in response to observing these events, would be to declare a truce and a moratorium on blaming anybody for creating these monsters. That would be the wise, sane thing to do if we lived in a kind of adult, humane politics. But since we don't live in that politics, and since we seem to be forcibly in a conversation about, where does this person come from, and if it turns out that they make mention of something that has also been discussed on the right, then therefore Tucker Carlson is somehow responsible for personally warping this guy's brain into this sick, twisted thing it became. Since we're in that conversation, if you're going to be asking, well, where would the most plausible hooks be for somebody like this to hang his crazy ranting on? Well, it's this ceaseless drumbeat of racialization that comes from the top down all the time. Racism is in the DNA of this country. If you're white, you're guilty, whatever. I mean, these things lend themselves, whether you decide that you want to go shoot a bunch of white people or you decide that you want to go shoot a bunch of black people. If you're casting about for some kind of crazy justification, it's right there, because as Ryan is sort of indicating, they come out with their faces hanging out and they say it. They say that white people are inherently oppressive, have guilt in their blood and their veins. And so, of course, you're going to get people who, when they are casting about, does that count as political radicalization? I don't know exactly how to define it, but I do know that it's the fodder for it is ever more on the table. And that's not the fault of Tucker Carlson, right? Tucker Carlson, getting rid of Tucker Carlson is not going to solve that problem if you continue to harangue people about the color of their skin every damn day. Refuse to let any person, black, white, or brown, forget what color they are and where that puts them in this hierarchy. You can shut down every Fox News organization you want to, and nothing is going to change about this situation until our elites take a good hard look in the mirror and come to understand their complicity in this foment that we've got going on in this country, this intense racialization. Again, my preference would be not to blame mass shootings on anybody. But since we're pointing fingers at Tucker Carlson, I think people that live in glass houses shouldn't throw stones. And to Ryan's point, maybe this will transition us into briefly touching on the latest hit piece, right? It's always this sort of sinister conspiracy when people start to develop language for this sort of stuff. So when you say, well, okay, there's this guy, Renaud Camus, he talks about the Great Replacement. Here are some ways that sort of dynamic might be visible. Ryan cited a bunch of ways in which it's openly stated in many of these outlets, right? When you start talking about that, then you are this sort of the shadowy cabal. And I wanted to read now from this Unpopular Front piece. Mostly I'll read from Ryan's response to it, actually. But this guy, John Gans, is taking aim at us, and it has now become sort of routine. We are this dark, sinister kind of plotting, which again, like, it's hard for me to understand how we can be so dark and sinister when literally all of our content is available, like, basically for free. I mean, you have to pay for the CRB, but like, there's not it's some secret Claremont publication that we're passing around internally. Like, we would love for more people to read what we write. So that part of it is kind of funny. So here we go. With Gans right, without flattering their vanity too much, they can appear at times to be something like Spectre, the shadowy organization in the James Bond novels and films that turns out to be behind every crime and calamity in the world. But more seriously, it's hard to avoid the impression that the Claremont Institute, rather than being an ivory tower or staid policy shop, constitutes a veritable conspiracy against the American Republic. Once again, I repeat, we would be more than happy for more and more people to read everything that we write. Like, there's really nothing secret about what we have to say. And Ryan took to Twitter and responded in sort of along these lines. Well, to our friends, supporters, and fellow travelers, writes Ryan, we're a quite open conspiracy to save the American Republic and way of life. And then if you go to his Twitter, you will find the Spectre logo superimposed onto the Claremont Institute logo, which I think is pretty dank, actually, and we'll be adopting it from now on. I don't know if it's revealing too much of the dark secret conspiracy to say that this Claremont Spectre logo is now a Slack react in our channels that you can use to tag to anybody's message if you feel they're conspiring to save the Republic. But I don't know, Ryan, do you want to elaborate on this? Is there more to say, or should we just note it and move on?
Yeah, I just quickly to say that it's kind of, Gans is buds with the Know Your Enemy podcast guys, which we've mentioned before. He's a somewhat frequent guest on there. There's this little cottage industry of kind of left of center and farther left. Matt Sitman of the Know Your Enemy podcast, a self-proclaimed democratic socialist, I think. I don't want to be unfair to him, but I think that's what he identifies as. Sort of left, or even more left, intellectual class who, it's kind of, we're like we're their beat, the Claremont Institute and the intellectual right, more broadly speaking these days, that is somehow sympathetic to or tried to understand or even said some encouraging things about Trump and the Trump phenomenon. So I guess we're just happy to provide work for these guys at a certain level, but I answered him once on Twitter because he was saying, "Oh, you're just owning it." I mean, if the shoe fits, and I just said, there's no point in arguing with this kind of breathless smear. It has, like a lot of these pieces, like Laura Field's pieces, it has the patina of like intellectual seriousness. Like they've read all our stuff, but ultimately it's just tendentious and partisan. It doesn't really try to understand us as we understand ourselves. It feels content to smear us and some of our alumni rather than engage with our arguments about politics or political philosophy or the state of the country. It's a lot of hand waving and name calling for the most part. There's some honesty here and there, but mostly not.
Yeah, and the funny thing is, okay, it's like, to your point, Spencer, that none of this is hidden. Like, it's all free. It's all available. We're a 501c3. Everything's transparent. But that's kind of to them, that's the problem. It's sort of like what you said about Tucker Carlson. Like, getting Tucker Carlson off the air isn't going to stop grocery store shootings. Right. But grocery store shootings, enough of them might get Tucker Carlson off the air. And that's what they really want. They don't care if there's grocery store shootings. The main thing they want to do is silence the right. So talking about all of the, it's kind of like the intrinsic, extrinsic thing, like talking about, it seems like they're talking about how much they like Lincoln and liberty. But what they really mean is like this other deep meaning of meaning of Lincoln, and what they say he really stands for, which is something dark and devious, and completely contrary to everything that we think that good people would think about the American founding and the American purpose. So, I mean, I'm sure this guy John Gans thinks of himself as like pro free speech and so forth, but reading his reading his blog post, it sounded like he was up there with that Fields woman, and we should, these people shouldn't really be allowed to do what they're doing. They published someone who is published by someone who published a reprint of like Savitri Devi or Julius Evola or whatever, some, Nazi from 80, 90 years ago. And thus, all of that kind of redounds back to them. So I think that's kind of the point, the fact that it's open. If nobody knew about it, then they wouldn't care.
I mean, this to both of your points, actually, that this piece ends by saying, it's worth being a bit concerned about the theological significance that that is Claremont, give to calamities like the Civil War. On the metaphysical level, they, as initiates, apparently have access to. We're at an even more cataclysmic point than the Civil War itself. In an interview with The Atlantic, Claremont's president said, "I think we're more divided now than we were then. They hope, they wish, they are working to make it so. Like much else today, it can be difficult to tell where absurdity ends and real danger begins." For those keeping score at home, that's Ryan in The Atlantic, Claremont's president. And this, I mean, it's really difficult for me to imagine that you could pay close attention to, or even passing attention to, the way that we write and speak about what Codeville called our cold Civil War, about the divisions in this country. And, you may think that our solution to that is wrong. You may think our diagnosis of it is wrong. But as we said when we talked about the Know Your Enemy podcast, it's like, I cannot see how you could imagine that what we want is like more division unto civil war. That, like, I mean, it is true that we have dedicated, most of us, our whole lives or major parts of our career to understanding how Lincoln was a great enough statesman to end slavery in this country, because we think that was like, a big triumph. But yeah, this thing where we, by talking about it, are trying to encourage a national crack up or civil war. I don't think I've ever heard a Claremonster talk about this stuff without like a deep sense of sorrow. So that part of it is really bizarre, unless it's just really a hit piece. To me, it's just insane.
Spencer. Oh yeah, quickly. Actually, Spencer, my last quote in the piece is the following. I worry about such a conflict. The Civil War was terrible. It should be the thing we try to avoid almost at all costs.
You mean
a lot of normal Americans? Yeah, a lot of normal Americans just want to go about their daily lives, raise their families, and make sure that our kids are successful. It's really not that ideological. Ultimately, I place a huge amount of hope in that. At the national level, the elite level, we have to advance intellectual ideas that we think are true and the politics that we think will be the most successful. But we underestimate the extent to which we can lower the temperature in America and move forward with a lot more unity. Anyway, I talked a lot about our divisions, and I stand by my quote that we're more divided than we were on the eve of the Civil War. As our friend Mike Anthon has put it also, there was one big thing that separated us then. It seems like there are 15 different things having to do with everything from the nature of human beings to the nature of sex to what justice is, that divide us and sort of permeate so much of our life and more of our lives, from schooling to advertising to movies. I mean, I'll end. I don't want to end, but a hopeful note for our listeners. We're not regionally divided like we were at the Civil War in this acute way. We're dispersed. The cities are blue, the suburbs may be a little redder, the country's redder yet. Some states are blue, some are red. It's sort of spread out. There's a bit of a north-south division, but nothing like the 1830s, 40s, and 50s. So I just want to put some perspective in all that. And, the tendentious pull quote from The Atlantic is perfect for Gans's approach in general.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that the way, for instance, Gans talks about Glenn Elmers and his piece in the American Mind about a year ago that got a bunch of attention, where Glenn said that there's millions of Americans, millions of people who are U.S. citizens, but they're not really Americans. And this just outraged people. They're like, how dare you? How dare you say that now that they're not Americans? Now, Gans actually, elides that and goes on with saying that we think that they're not citizens. But the left is constantly talking about what's America and who we are as Americans. And that's not American. And, how dare you say that someone who just walked over the border is not an American? So there's a lot of, there's just a lot of lying and cynicism. That's all.
Yeah, I think that's sort of sufficient unto the day of this particular hit piece, unless either of you has any burning last remarks on it. I mean, I never really find these things like super intellectually stimulating. It would be nice if there were a more sort of sophisticated left in general, but also like if we had more sophisticated enemies to actually engage with and lock horns with. But I guess we have internal disagreements and stuff that serve that role. But let's talk about some of these other news items. I wanted to touch on Madison Cawthorn, who's just conceded his, I guess it's his primary race in North Carolina. And I thought we should raise this because it's an interesting counterpoint to what we were talking about maybe 2 weeks ago. And also James and I did it a little bit last week about the power of the Trump endorsement, because we had J.D. Vance, who won his primary, and a number of other outsiders. Generally, the Trump endorsement seems to be Dr. O's. Yes, right.
Dr. O's,
your
Dr.
favorite
O's
politician, Seth. I know you're Seth Barron, noted O's stan. This is like we can maybe do a whole other segment on him at some other point. But I would like to talk about Madison Cawthorn and women's lingerie. So this series of sort of to me really sort of strange and salacious news hits on Cawthorn started to emerge. The first one, I think, if my memory is serving, was this comment that he made about cocaine orgies in politics. I'm just going to read his. He was talking to John Lovell on the Warrior Poet Society podcast, and Cawthorn, who, by the way, does a lot of those podcasts, like the Order of Man, these sort of like you're a young successful man, how do you restore the republic or whatever. And he says this: the sexual perversion that goes on in Washington, being kind of a young guy in Washington where the average age is probably 60 or 70. You look at these people, a lot of them that I've looked up to through my life. I've always paid attention to politics. Then all of a sudden you get invited. We're going to have a sexual get-together at one of our homes. You should come. I would like, as a side note, to know who in the world has ever used the phrase sexual get-together. What did you just ask me to come to? And then you realize they're asking you to come to an orgy. Some of the people leading on the movement try to remove addiction in our country, and then you watch them do a key bump of cocaine right in front of you. And it's like, this is wild. I would like to go on the record saying that I did not know what a key bump was until this news cycle occurred. But then there ensued these really funny sort of just like, I don't know, people started unearthing these old photos of him. Like here's one, there's photos of him on a cruise wearing women's lingerie. There's sort of an Instagram relationship that he has with, I guess it's his cousin or his buddy, where they like, say all of these sort of homoerotic things to each other. All of which, let me say, like looking at the records of their interactions, this is extremely heterosexual behavior. Like it's actually not something that like a secretly closeted gay person would do. It's definitely something that like a bro would do with his bros to sort of joke around and make fun of him. But anyway, some stew of this seems to have lost him the nomination, or else maybe there's something more here. I mean, I've also seen people talking about Cawthorn as kind of a rhino, or they feel like he's more in the like Dan Crenshaw, sort of too buttoned up, too squeaky clean, not enough of a fighter. But he did get the Trump endorsement. So I just think there are kind of a lot of interesting different factors in this, cultural, political, realignment wise. And I wanted to know what you guys make of it.
The Occams Razor explanation is that this is all part of an oppo file dumped by his opponent, right? That would be traditional political skullduggery, perhaps with an assist from the Republican establishment who don't like Cawthorn at all. So that would be probably my guess at the origin of all this. And those types know their electorate well in North Carolina. I mean, this is precisely the kind of a bunch of smoke and about a bunch of scandal smoke and not too much fire. That was just enough in a sort of high 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 information voter primary electorate where they just decided it was too much for them. I think there's not a huge story there. It would be bigger, Spencer, if it's if the orgy loving Democratic and GOP establishment old guard in DC really decided he had to go because he was revealing their secrets. As much fun as that is, I kind of doubt it.
Yeah, but then he would be dead.
He would be Epstein.
Yeah, he would have been like,
he would have had a car accident or something.
Exactly. Yeah, I don't really know what to make of it. I mean, I followed him a little bit over the last couple of years. I saw him at CPAC, but I didn't talk to him. I mean, he was very handsome, but I kind of felt like he was maybe a little paper thin, and it seemed like he didn't really have like enough muscle behind whatever it was he was trying to present, like intellectually, morally, personally. Or didn't he have some issues? Like he got married and then got divorced very quickly, and it sounded like he had some like sexual harassment things. I mean, I don't know if any of it was real, but he lost. What's his opponent like? Is his opponent like not a MAGA guy?
Well, I don't know what his relationship is to MAGA. I mean, he didn't get the Trump endorsement. He looks much more establishment than Cawthorn sort of represents himself as. And it's interesting, a la Ryan, to kind of imagine this as like an establishment GOP hit, right? Just like trying to wrest control of the party back. And in which case, if that's the explanation, then it's interesting how unsuccessful that's been generally, right? I mean, this is like kind of one win in a field that looks like it's turning Trumpier by the day. I also think that like Seth offers kind of another Occams Razor, which is maybe Cawthorn's just actually not that good a politician. He had kind of a moment, but didn't really work out. And that's, to me, like I have never really I couldn't tell you what Madison Cawthorn believes, despite having listened to him often. You know, I don't get a sense that there's really like a lot of there. Could be wrong, but and so yeah, there may be just some combination of those factors. And I guess I feel like everybody is just kind of, I mean, James and I talked about this a little bit last week, but everybody is just kind of holding their breath to see what Trump's going to do. And it looks like, you know, he's poised to be highly influential, but like nobody, you know, we're all kind of just waiting. And this is like, you know, the next little drip in that bucket, but not really anything.
I will also add that wasn't Madison Cawthorn arrested twice or stopped twice for like forgetting that he had a gun in his bag at the airport? I mean, he's a little he's a little odd, right? You know.
And there's also this thing where like people sort of think of him as, I mean, he is a veteran, I guess, but
not really.
People think of him as
he wasn't wounded in war. He like jumped into a swimming pool or he had a car accident. I mean, it's sad, but
yeah, it's very tragic, but it's sort of like it looks like, I mean, Crenshaw's got that eye patch, you know, and it looks like he's a battle-hardened hero, and you get the same impression from Cawthorn, but in fact, right, very sad, but not the reality. I think he was like, no, I mean, I think he was like driving with his buddy, and he had his feet up on the dash or something, and like that's just a recipe for really awful injuries. Okay, well, I don't want to continue reading the tea leaves for too long as we're sort of cycling through these many and various topics, but any last words on Cawthorn before we talk about Mary Poppins?
No.
That's a no. All right.
Yeah, I mean, he's still pretty young. He may yet have a future in politics.
Yes, indeed. Great. Okay, so let us now turn to a topic that I keep saying we're going to talk about, and we never really, there's always been so much going on, but we haven't really put our fingers on it in the show specifically. And we almost let it go too late because it turns out that we're talking here about the Disinformation Governance Board, which was established by the Biden administration through the Department of Homeland Security and headed up by this woman, Nina Jankowicz. I think that's how you say her name. She was really just right out of central casting, like couldn't make it up. If you wrote a novel about her, people would say this was too on the nose. It's just over the top. I don't believe it. Sort of product of these various nonpartisan think tanks, seemingly a so-called expert on like Ukraine and Eastern Europe. Apparently, it was sort of left unclear, but was going to be in charge of like monitoring disinformation out of the war on Ukraine, so-called, but also like an amateur musical theater star, and appeared shortly after the announcement of her nomination, singing a Mary Poppins parody about misinformation, which must be seen to be believed. I can't do it justice. You just have to go look it up. But it's all been canceled, or at least put on hold. They put it on pause through the Department of Homeland Security, and the sort of developing narrative about this, which is what I really wanted to ask you guys about, is the developing narrative is that this was a GOP win. I mean, there was huge backlash. It was too much of a lob. It was just really right down the pike, over the plate. So easy to not only make fun of this, but like even kind of buttoned up establishment Republicans who typically refrain from grandstanding to the dismay of the base. Like, it's just too easy to talk about this, to point this out as an egregious example of sort of Bidenian hate speech or whatever, the doublespeak, this ministry of truth, misinformation, which is protected under the First Amendment, is now going to be somehow monitored. Is incredibly creepy, and people are really celebrating that. It's been put out of commission. I've also heard some sort of our dissident friends saying, no, you don't understand. They're putting it out of commission because it was too obvious. You caught on, and the next one is going to be invisible. You're not even going to know it's happening. Which, I mean, my feeling is like that's already going on. Like there's already obvious collusion between big tech and the federal government. All that was happening here was a bid was being made to sort of formalize it and manufacture consent for it by ramming it through the Department of Homeland Security. But do you guys buy this thing that this is actually like we actually kind of made them blink on this?
No, I think they trotted it out basically the day after, a couple days after Elon Musk said he was going to buy Twitter. And now he's put his purchase of Twitter on hold, so they're putting this on hold. I mean, I don't know. Maybe they're just kind of like, waiting, retooling it, waiting to see what happens. But look, the government can throw all kinds of obstacles in the purchase of a $50 billion company. So maybe they just figure they'll mess it up that way. I don't know. In a weird way, it's strange because they had the supermarket shooting over the weekend, and now they're ginning up this whole war against hate speech. And now they're shutting down their disinformation group. I feel like they've got something else going on in the background. Maybe I'm thinking that it was like it was like they were waving a flag to get our attention in one corner, and then they've really got something else going on. I don't know.
Well, the bigger strategy is the one that they outlined publicly in their counterterrorism document, national security strategy document from last year, which is, the main domestic terror threat is white supremacy. And so it's going to be a big focus of the administration's domestic security efforts. That hasn't changed. I mean, it could be the case that this board, which, I mean, if you look at Democratic and left-wing rhetoric, this board is absolutely necessary. I mean, unless we stop. I was listening to one of the many instances I keep saying of podcasts I listen to, so our listeners don't have to. I was listening to Pod Save America on the way in this morning, and they were just aghast. They couldn't understand why the manifesto and the 2 minutes stream before Twitch shut it down of the crazy guy in Buffalo, why the social media companies couldn't do more to stop all of this. That disinformation in a way, is leading young men to perpetrate crimes like this, and then the platforms are allowing them to become heroes for it. So this is, this is on the front burner, this whole thing. So maybe she was just too embarrassing, and they decided, we've got a great story going with the Buffalo thing to bash the right with. Let's not have any distractions. She's kind of clownish. We didn't do a deep enough dive on her, and she has these weird kooky videos and is singing about her desire to shut down misinformation in weird ways. I don't know. That's pretty ho-hum for Washington, right? Somebody becoming a little too embarrassing, and the press office just deciding with the legal team and everyone, the senior team just deciding this isn't worth it. We keep hemorrhaging, bad news hits on this kook. We made a mistake. Let's shut this thing down. But I agree with you guys that given the priorities of the Biden administration and their announced focuses for domestic law enforcement and domestic counterterrorism, they need the disinformation board. And so maybe they'll rebrand it. Maybe they'll quietly just do it quietly. And Miss Jankowicz had to go. I think all those things can be true. I don't know if I'm quite subscribed to your theory, Seth, that I know you were kind of just chuckling about it and floating it, but that it has to do with Elon and Twitter.
I meant that. I just thought it was an interesting coincidence.
Yeah, no, it definitely is.
Well, I mean, to James's point about January 6th, where he says, like, if you were an intelligence agency such as the CIA or the FBI, like, you would be stupid or derelict in your duty not to have agents in the crowd during this kind of massive rally at ratification day. Similarly, it's hard for me to imagine that the government doesn't have an interest in what Musk is doing with Twitter. Like, we have now detailed at perhaps painful length for our listeners the extent to which the government is just really grafted into and melded along with these big tech corporations. They help the corporations grow. They make use of them to do things that they constitutionally can't. They, are just really intimately intertwined with these companies, and to watch somebody with a sort of stated aversion to groupthink and to cathedral rhetoric and so forth, to watch somebody like sail in and make moves to buy it is, I'm sure, deeply unsettling. And like, again, if your goal is to quote unquote shut down misinformation, like, and if you're the federal government or in charge of the US federal government, like, you would probably not be doing what you perceive to be your job if you didn't have some like interest in it, discussion of it. What can we do around this? And yeah, like, I don't know, the coincidence is kind of like too good to pass up, but yeah, I don't know enough to know like what the actual conversations are going on behind the scenes. But I will say this, like, the more I think about it, the more I think, given that like the CIA and Google have been in cahoots since at least 9/11, and given that like you don't have to put on a tinfoil hat to just observe the public records of how these companies have been weaponized. You can just watch the now defunct Jen Psaki like talking about how she flags posts on Facebook for the moderators to take down or to censor or whatever. These things are really right out in the open, and as we've been discussing now for some time, like, the fact that they're out in the open makes it even more forbidden to notice them. And so all of this is a way of saying, like, what do they need a disinformation board for, right? Like, what do they need to do this in public for? Why won't they just, kind of thread it through their already existing systems, as they announced their intention to do in that domestic terrorism document? Like, and the more I think about it, the more I really do think that, like, putting this woman in front of us with her kind of just extreme ratcheted up to 11, like, cartoonish, the Hunger Games, you make any comparison you want and it would be apt, like the Effie White in the Hunger Games or whatever, to put her out there in front of us is really just a way of testing the waters to see, like, are we going to kind of go along with this? Like, are we at the stage yet where we don't have to do this in secret? We don't have to cover our tracks because it's really kind of exhausting. And like, what if we just sort of slapped it out there and kind of forbade you to object the way they often do with the trans stuff? Like, here's Rachel Levine. Like, I dare you to say that his name is actually Richard. Like, I sort of wonder if this was a move like that, and on that level it backfired. Whereas, which, as Ryan is saying, like, is kind of a garden variety PR problem, as opposed to they're somehow rolling back their intention to censor dissent.
We should also bring up the more amusing side of this, which is was highlighted by 79-year-old digital reporter Taylor Lorenz. Oh wait, is she 49? I can't remember.
Venerable ancient crone. I'm sorry, that was bad. But go on. Yeah.
No, yeah, she's an awful human being, but nonetheless covers digital media for the Washington Post. Lorenz wrote this sort of breathless piece about how Jankowicz was the casualty of kind of right-wing, smear campaign and disinformation on Twitter by Jack Posobiec and others, merely by
may only hope.
Yeah, but as far as we could tell, merely by just unearthing her old videos and sending the internet to go search for embarrassing things that Ms. Jankowicz did before. And then it led to this hilarious exchange. I'll just list the question, but the Biden administration sort of leaned into this narrative that it was unfortunate that Jankowicz had to go, but it's really she was being smeared and all this stuff. So Peter Doocy asked the new press secretary the following question: the Disinformation Board is being shut down because of disinformation?
Well, what's interesting about the Lorenz thing is that she and Nina Jankowicz actually share this really interesting new trope. It's kind of like, new leftist rhetoric just dropped. It sort of took me a while to become cognizant of it, but I don't think I've heard it like until recently. And that is like, this is what it's like to be a woman online. Like, I think, Lorenz has used that for exact phrase, and Jankowicz has actually published a book, How to Be a Woman Online. There were a number of articles about it when Musk came out with the Twitter buy that, like, the New York Times was running op-eds like, this is what it's like to be a woman online. And you can, slot in your preferred oppressed category. Like, this is what it's like to be trans online. This is what it's like to be gay man online. And like, I do sort of find this amusing that, like, just existing in digital space, like, should be smooth sailing. Like, do these people think that it's easy and fun for the rest of us to get on Twitter? Like, who has a positive experience going online and like expressing political opinions? Literally no one. It's famous for being a miserable experience from start to finish. It makes everybody the worst version of himself. You always come away from it feeling glum and dissatisfied. Like, this thing where, it's uniquely the province now of the protected special genders and races to feel bad about like what your life is like online is really kind of amusing to me, and dovetails nicely with yet another news story which we didn't even talk about before the show, but I just want to toss it in there. This new woman, the new Jen Psaki, Karine Jean-Pierre, who is a black gay woman and has made a big deal out of this, while simultaneously like flubbing worse than Psaki, I have to say. I mean, showing herself almost unable.
It has not been an auspicious start at press.
It really, I mean, the thing where they asked her, how is raising taxes on gajillionaires gonna fix inflation? And she was like, well, we are raising taxes on people to pay their fair share. It's like, this is, I like Aaron Sabarium is often kind of charting the rise of this generation who didn't watch wokeness happen. They just swam in it like the sea. And it's like this person is suddenly realizing that these are not credentials. Like, I'm a black gay woman. This is not sort of what the job is. But maybe, in fact, it is what the job is. I mean, maybe that's the whole point of this. Anyway, I just find this new kind of rhetoric interesting. Like, this is what it's like to be a woman.
One more thing just about the Jankowicz thing. I just wanted to read two quick paragraphs from Lorenz's piece for the Washington Post, because I think it points to a theme that we've investigated and turned over on this podcast for the last couple of years now, and it will just continue. And it's very much wrapped up with the concern about disinformation on the left. Let me read these first. So that the subhead is a disastrous rollout. Just hours after Jankowicz tweeted about her new job, far-right influencer Jack Posobiec posted a tweets, accusing the Biden administration of creating a ministry of truth. Actually, just a sidebar, Posobiec didn't use that term first, this piece on disinformation is already peddling disinformation. Posobiec's 1.7 million followers quickly sprung into action. By the end of the day, there were at least 53,235 posts on Twitter mentioning Disinformation Governance Board, many referencing Jankowicz by name, according to a report by Advanced Democracy and Nonpartisan, blah, blah, blah. That number skyrocketed. Posobiec's early tweets shaped the narrative, and Jankowicz was positioned as the primary target. Republican lawmakers echoed Posobiec's framing and amplified it to their audiences. U.S. Senate hopeful and Missouri Attorney General Eric Schmidt and Representative Andrew S. Clyde of Republican Georgia both posted similar tweets to Posobiec. Former Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard, D. Hawaii, also posted a video repeating Posobiec's statement. So this is what the left and the sort of mainstream media apparatus in league with the current Democratic administration cannot stand. I mean, Posobiec, who has 1.7 or what million followers or whatever it is, he kind of can do on his own through this disintermediated and decentralized thing that is digital social media. He's kind of a little press office in and of himself and can do media political comms, which used to be only the province of the DC establishment and their various press secretaries and PR people in government, and then their stenographers at the Washington Post and the New York Times. That's really what all this is about. It's kind of how dare he roll out a political and media hit on one of ours that gains traction in 2 days and takes out one of our people. I mean, that's the real threat. And it's a big part of the backdrop behind quote unquote disinformation or misinformation.
Okay, I'm so glad that you read this because it's perfect to tie in also with like the Lorenz stuff and how to be a woman online. Like you read that description and it has the exact rhetorical ring. There now exists an entire sort of job description, which is usually called something like web reporter or whatever, which in and of itself, right? Like you don't need a tech reporter if you're a news outlet because the whole world is tech. So, I mean, I guess you can get somebody to talk about, like to be on the web beat or whatever. But if you listen to like, the ICYMI podcast on Slate, which is a podcast I listen to so that you don't have to, like, it's the same thing where they talk about like brigading, right? Which is where they say, you leave a bunch of nasty YouTube comments on a video you don't like. You get all your friends to do it too. Or you read the rhetoric of that, of that piece that you just read aloud, Ryan, and it's like, this is a description. What is actually happening here? This is a description of Jack Posobiec, who's got a huge Twitter following because he puts out content that people like and they follow him on Twitter and they listen to what he has to say. He's responding to a thing like truthfully, and literally she's out here writing like he has done a bad tweets, like because this is the sort of way this cloud of rhetoric that is designed to portray like conservatives having ideas and making points successfully as if it were like a case of battery and assault. Like it's just really kind of, it is amazing.
And as though there's some kind of right-wing communications machine that operates in this incredibly devious conspiratorial fashion, utilizing resources that they've unfairly gained. When, like you said, he put out a tweet about a government official.
Yeah.
It's not like he picked on, like this might have made sense if, oh, look at this. They just plucked some obscure nobody and turned it into a national story. But the administration appointed this woman to have like a huge job. And then it's really that old saying, like, may a cat look at a king. And they really don't like it. They don't think that they should be open to scrutiny. And they will hide behind, this is what it's like to be a woman online. I literally have had, like, what did Taylor Lorenz say? Like, her friends have had to go into hiding. I mean, it just like ludicrous statements. Because, and I thought the whole point of having a media journalist is like, she is savvy, she is tough, and she knows all these dark corners of the internet that you don't want to know about, but you don't want to go to, but she does. She's willing to. So if she's such a toughie, then like, why does she cry when someone like makes fun of her friend at Homeland Security? I mean, it's like,
no, it's totally. I mean, the thing where the real obscene moment was when she did the cry bully act and then immediately doxed libs of TikTok. It was within like 3 days or something, and kind of went on this long, incoherent rant about why that's completely different and why she's, she should be protected. But there is, this weird sense that like, you're guilty of assault. And right, if you have a big Twitter, like, you probably shouldn't dunk on some 5 follower count guy unless they're being really egregious. I'm sure that I have friends who will disagree with this, but like, you shouldn't sick your followers on like, some poor anon in his basement. But
right, don't they're acting like he was punching down. Like, why are you punching down at the Biden administration?
This is the president of the United States. Have some decency. Be sympathetic. Yeah, it is kind of. I mean, I guess in some ways it's just like, victimology mapped onto the internet. But right, you would think that the reporter on the beat of like white supremacists or whatever is supposed to be tough and like no nonsense. But this was with, Donna Zuckerberg, her sister of Mark, put out this book a while back about all the nasty white supremacists and the like pickup artists who are reading Ovid and they're misusing the Stoics. It's like, what is this really like your personal Afghanistan, that someone somewhere is reading Marcus Aurelius and saying things you don't like about it? Like that basically seems to be the thesis here.
Yeah, for those who forget, Zuckerberg's sister is a classicist who's taken up as her little fiefdom in academia, Spencer, the lament of the misuse by bad people of classic literature.
Which, right, that term, if you ever hear somebody like a classicist talking about the misuse, and by the way, I'd like to state for the record that we're using the term classicist very, very loosely here.
Yes.
That book, she does have a PhD, I should say, from Princeton, but that book contains like just straight up open mistranslations of rudimentary Greek words.
You don't think she actually can even really read Attic Greek, Spencer? That's your hunch?
So I reviewed this book for Real Clear when it came out, and
oh yeah, I forgot about that.
I have no. It's very hard from reading a book to tell like how good somebody's language skills are, unless they're obviously incredible, which they definitely aren't. But she does print like on the page a flatly wrong translation of, again, a very basic Greek word. I think it's Andrea, which means courage. Which is just, I don't know, like it's sort of staggering to me. Although
what did she translate it as? Maybe that's right.
Well, her whole point was, okay, this is like a little bit high weeds, but her whole argument was that Latin and Greek are inherently sexist languages because in both of them, the word for virtue is directly linked to the word for man, implying that virtue is inherently male. And so she then trots out these two words, virtus and Andrea. Virtus in Latin does in fact mean virtue and is related to vir, man. Andrea is also related to man, aner, but is the word for courage. And there is a totally separate word, which definitely is the cognate, or the corresponding word for virtus, which is arete. Anyway, I'm going on and on, but like, the incoherence of this stuff,
translate often as excellence, right?
Arete, yeah, excellence, right? It's to being really good, being excellent, being really good at being a person, basically, is ethical arete.
So she confused a virtue, courage, for virtue, simply. Yeah.
Yes, and then sort of went on to build this whole argument about it, which was on the next page, again, quoting from memory here, so, don't at me, but like on the next page, she then directly cites Musonius, a Stoic, who says, like, even though the word Andrea is directly related to the word for man. Like, women can also have courage. So like there's sort of a crazy, anyway, a lot of these places are, like Princeton, are sort of relaxing their language requirements. They're not sending their best is all I'm saying.
Right.
But if you ever hear somebody talking about misuse, what they mean is like people I don't like reading good books
Right.
and like drawing
And interpreting it differently.
right. And interpreting it to suggest that like maybe we should actually take seriously the claims in them, like that virtue and manliness are goods. You know, that's really the problem, is like you're allowed to read Marcus Aurelius, but you have to like deconstruct and critique him so that like he's revealed to be sexist and you're revealed to be better. Like that, if you actually read him for advice on like, you know, how to be a kind of a stoic dude, then you're evil, fascist. Well, that's. I think we've now belabored, or rather, we've tortured our audience with enough ancient Greek etymology, and we've gotten through a number of topics. So, thank you guys, as always, for joining. Thank you for listening to the Roundtable. If you want to learn more, visit our websites at AmericanMind.org, Claremont.org, ClaremontReviewOfBooks.com, and our DC-based Center for the American Way of Life at DC.Claremont.org. You can donate to support the show at claremont.org/donate. Don't forget to rate, review, share, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks, everyone. Talk to you next week.